The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Kensington Palace, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Catherine, the Princess of Wales, stood quietly in her private study, her fingers tracing the edge of a letter that had arrived just hours before. The royal seal was unmistakable, but the contents within had shaken her to her very core. William entered the room softly, his footsteps barely audible on the Persian rug. He had learned to read his wife's moods over their years together, and today something was different. The usual brightness in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a distant look that spoke of deep contemplation. "Darling, you've been standing there for nearly an hour," he said gently, placing his hand on her shoulder. "What has captured your attention so completely?" Catherine turned slowly, the letter still clutched in her hands. Her voice, usually steady and composed, carried a tremor that William had rarely heard. "It's about Mrs. Henderson," she whispered. "The woman we met at the children's hospital last month. The one whose grandson was battling leukemia." William's expression softened immediately. He remembered the elderly woman clearly, her weathered hands clutching a small photograph of a boy with bright eyes and a brave smile. She had approached them after their official visit, tears streaming down her face as she thanked them for bringing hope to the ward. "What about her?" William asked, though something in Catherine's expression already suggested the answer. "She's written to tell us that little Tommy lost his battle 3 days ago. But that's not why she wrote." Catherine's voice broke slightly. "She wanted to thank us because our visit gave Tommy strength in his final weeks. He kept talking about the day the prince and princess came to see him." The room fell silent except for the gentle ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. William felt the familiar weight of responsibility that came with their position, but today it felt heavier somehow. They had always known that their public appearances meant something to people, but moments like these reminded them of the profound impact their presence could have on individual lives. Catherine continued reading from the letter, her voice growing stronger. "She says that Tommy made her promise to tell us something. He wanted us to know that even though he was scared, seeing us made him feel like he mattered, like his fight was important." William pulled Catherine into his arms, feeling her lean into his embrace. In moments like these, the grandeur of their titles and the weight of their duties seemed to fade away, leaving just two people trying to make sense of the profound responsibility they carried. "We have to go to the funeral," Catherine said suddenly, pulling back to look at William directly. "I know it's not protocol. I know it will create security concerns and media attention, but this family needs to know that Tommy's life mattered to us too." William studied his wife's face, seeing the determination that had drawn him to her all those years ago at university. It was the same look she had worn when she decided to pursue her early childhood development work, the same expression when she fought for mental health awareness programs. Catherine had always possessed an innate understanding that their privilege came with the obligation to serve others. "The palace will never approve it," William said carefully. "A private funeral for a commoner attended by senior royals? The protocol officers will have concerns about precedent, about security, about the message it sends." "Then we don't tell them until after," Catherine replied firmly. "William, that little boy spent his last weeks talking about us. His grandmother took the time to write a letter, in the midst of her grief, to make sure we knew how much our simple visit meant. How can we not honor that?" William found himself thinking about his own children, George, Charlotte, and Louis, and how he would feel if one of them were in Tommy's position. The thought sent a chill through him, but it also crystallized something important. Their roles as parents had fundamentally changed how they approached their royal duties. They couldn't simply be figureheads anymore. They had to be examples of compassion and humanity for their own children to follow. "There will be consequences," he warned gently. "The media will question our judgment. Some will say we're breaking with tradition unnecessarily. Others might see it as a publicity stunt." Catherine's eyes flashed with a fire that William recognized well. "Let them question. Let them criticize. Tommy Henderson was 7 years old, William. 7. He faced something that would terrify grown men with more courage than I've ever seen. If showing up to honor his memory means facing some criticism, then that's a small price to pay." The afternoon light was beginning to fade as they stood together in the quiet study. Outside, the sounds of London continued. Traffic, sirens, the distant chatter of tourists hoping to catch a glimpse of royalty through the palace gates. But inside this room, Two people were making a decision that would ripple far beyond anything they could imagine. William thought about his grandmother, Queen Elizabeth II, and the lessons she had taught him about duty and service. But he also thought about his mother, Princess Diana, and her instinct to reach out to those who were suffering. Perhaps true royal duty wasn't about following protocol blindly, but about knowing when protocol needed to be set aside in service of something greater. "The funeral is tomorrow afternoon," Catherine said quietly, consulting the letter again. "A small service at St. Mary's Church in Hampshire. Mrs. Henderson says they're expecting maybe 30 people, family and a few friends from Tommy's school." "Then we'll be there," William said simply. "We'll drive ourselves, no security detail that can't be subtle. We'll sit in the back, pay our respects, and leave quietly." Catherine's smile was the first he had seen from her all day. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know this isn't easy." "The right thing rarely is," William replied, echoing words his father had spoken to him many times over the years. "But sometimes that's exactly why it needs to be done." As evening approached, they began making quiet preparations for a journey that would challenge everything they had been taught about royal protocol, but would ultimately remind them why their positions truly mattered. The drive to Hampshire took longer than expected. William gripped the steering wheel of their unmarked car, navigating through the countryside roads while Catherine sat beside him, reading and rereading Mrs. Henderson's letter. They had left Kensington Palace before dawn, telling only their most trusted staff that they would be unavailable for the afternoon. "Are you having second thoughts?" Catherine asked quietly, noticing the tension in William's shoulders. "No," he replied firmly, "but I keep thinking about what we're walking into. This family is in the deepest pain imaginable. What if our presence makes things harder for them? What if we're intruding on their grief?" Catherine folded the letter carefully and placed it in her purse. "Mrs. Henderson wouldn't have written to us if she didn't want us there. Sometimes grief needs witnesses, William. Sometimes people need to know that their loved one's life touched others, even strangers." The countryside rolled past their windows, green fields dotted with sheep, old stone walls that had stood for centuries, small villages where life moved at a gentler pace than in London. It was the kind of England that tourists rarely saw, the quiet heart of the country that existed far from the cameras and crowds that usually surrounded the royal couple. As they drove, Catherine found herself thinking about the dozens of hospital visits they had made over the years. Usually, there was a careful choreography to these events, pre-selected patients to meet, specific talking points provided by staff, photographers positioned to capture the perfect moment of royal compassion. But Tommy Henderson had been different. He had approached them during a brief, unscheduled moment, tugging on his grandmother's hand and pointing excitedly at Catherine's dress. "Princess Kate, Princess Kate," he had called out, his voice carrying across the hospital corridor despite his obvious weakness. When they had stopped to talk with him, his enthusiasm had been infectious. He had told them about his favorite football team, showed them a drawing he had made of a castle, and asked William if being a prince was really fun. "He reminded me of Louis," Catherine said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence in the car. William glanced at her, understanding immediately. Their youngest son had the same irrepressible spirit, the same way of finding joy in simple things despite whatever challenges he faced. "That's what makes this so hard," William admitted. "It's impossible not to see our own children in these situations, to imagine how we would feel, how we would want to be treated." They passed a sign indicating they were 5 miles from their destination. Catherine felt her stomach tighten with nerves. What did you say to a family burying a 7-year-old? How did you offer comfort when words seemed so inadequate? "I keep thinking about what Diana would have done," William said quietly, voicing a thought that often came to him in difficult moments. "She would have gone," Catherine replied without hesitation. "She would have ignored every protocol, every warning, every concern about precedent. She would have followed her heart, and faced the consequences later," William added, remembering his mother's struggles with the establishment throughout her life. "Some things are worth the consequences," Catherine said firmly. They arrived at St. Mary's Church 15 minutes before the service was scheduled to begin. It was a small ancient building with weathered stone walls and a modest bell tower. The parking area was nearly full with older cars and a few bicycles. Clearly, this was a community that knew each other well. William parked at the far end of the lot, And they sat for a moment, watching people make their way toward the church entrance. Most were dressed simply but formally, their faces bearing the solemn expressions of those preparing to say goodbye to someone too young to lose. There, Catherine pointed toward an elderly woman being supported by a middle-aged man. That's Mrs. Henderson. Even from a distance, they could see the woman's grief in the way she moved, slow and careful, as if the weight of loss was physically pulling her down. The man beside her, probably her son, Tommy's father, kept a protective arm around her shoulders. "We should wait until everyone else goes in," William suggested. "Let the family have their moment without worrying about us." They watched as the last of the mourners entered the church. The silence that followed felt heavy with unspoken emotion. William and Catherine looked at each other, both understanding that they were about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. "Ready?" William asked. Catherine nodded, though her heart was racing. They had attended state funerals, memorial services for dignitaries, ceremonial events with hundreds of attendees. But this felt more significant somehow, more personal and therefore more frightening. They walked slowly toward the church entrance, their footsteps crunching on the gravel path. The heavy wooden door stood slightly ajar, and they could hear the soft sound of voices inside. William pushed the door open gently, and they stepped into the dim interior. The church was exactly what they had expected. Simple wooden pews, stained glass windows that cast colorful patterns on the stone floor, flowers arranged with obvious care but limited resources. At the front of the church sat a small white casket, almost overwhelmed by the bright children's drawings and stuffed animals that surrounded it. Several heads turned as they entered, and Catherine heard someone gasp quietly. An elderly man who appeared to be the vicar approached them quickly, his face a mixture of surprise and concern. "Your Royal Highnesses," he whispered. "We weren't expecting." "That is, we didn't realize we're here as friends," William said quietly. "We don't want to disrupt anything. We'd just like to pay our respects." The vicar nodded, still looking somewhat stunned. He gestured toward the back pews, and William and Catherine slipped quietly into the last row. From their position, they could see Mrs. Henderson in the front pew, her shoulders shaking with quiet sobs. As they settled into their seats, Catherine felt the weight of every gaze in the small church. Word was spreading in whispers from pew to pew. The Prince and Princess of Wales had come to Tommy Henderson's funeral. A 7-year-old boy from Hampshire, who had never done anything more remarkable than fight cancer with extraordinary courage, was being honored by the future King and Queen of England. The service began with a hymn that filled the small space with voices united in grief and love. Catherine found herself thinking about the letter in her purse, about Tommy's final message, about the responsibility they carried not just as royals but as human beings who had been touched by a child's courage. She glanced at William and saw her own emotions reflected in his face. Determination mixed with sorrow, duty intertwined with genuine caring. They were exactly where they needed to be, regardless of what anyone else might think. The vicar's voice carried gently through the small church as he began to speak about Tommy Henderson's short but remarkable life. He told stories that painted a picture of a boy who had faced his illness with determination and joy, who had continued to dream about becoming a footballer, even while undergoing chemotherapy, who had made his classmates laugh even on his hardest days. Catherine found herself gripping William's hand as the vicar described Tommy's final weeks. He spoke often about the day the prince and princess visited his hospital ward, the elderly man said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the church. Tommy told everyone who would listen that Princess Catherine had the most beautiful smile he had ever seen, and that Prince William promised him that brave boys like Tommy were the real heroes. A sob escaped from Mrs. Henderson in the front pew, and Catherine felt tears begin to well in her own eyes. She remembered that conversation now. William had knelt down to Tommy's eye level and spoken to him about courage, about how fighting cancer made him braver than any soldier. At the time, it had seemed like a simple kindness, the sort of interaction they had with children dozens of times each month. Now, hearing how those words had sustained a dying child, they took on profound significance. The service continued with readings from family members and friends. Tommy's teacher, a young woman whose voice shook with emotion, read a poem that Tommy had written about his dreams. His uncle shared memories of fishing trips and football matches watched together on television. Each story built a picture of a life that, while brief, had been filled with love and connection. William found himself studying the congregation around them. These weren't the wealthy donors or political figures who usually surrounded them at public events. These were ordinary people, shopkeepers, teachers, pensioners, who had been touched by one small boy's life. The woman in front of them wore a coat that had clearly seen many years of use. The man across the aisle had calloused hands that spoke of manual labor. But their grief was no less profound than any he had witnessed at state funerals. When it came time for Mrs. Henderson to speak, the elderly woman struggled to rise from her seat. Her son helped her to the simple wooden lectern at the front of the church, where she stood for a moment, gathering her strength. "Tommy was my whole world," she began, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying clearly in the hushed church. "When his parents died in that car accident 3 years ago, he came to live with me. I thought I was too old, too set in my ways to raise a child. But Tommy taught me that love doesn't age, that joy can exist even in the darkest times." She paused, reaching into her pocket for a handkerchief. "These past months, watching him fight this terrible disease, I've seen courage that puts us all to shame. Even when he was scared, even when the treatments made him so sick, Tommy never lost his kindness. He worried more about me than himself." Mrs. Henderson's gaze swept across the congregation, lingering for a moment on William and Catherine in the back pew. Tommy had one great joy in his final weeks. He met 2 people who took time from their busy lives to notice him, to make him feel special. He talked about that day constantly. He made me promise to tell them that meeting them was better than any medicine. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of quiet weeping throughout the church. Catherine felt William's hand tighten around hers, both of them struggling with the weight of Mrs. Henderson's words. "I know they're here today," Mrs. Henderson continued, her voice growing stronger. "I see them in the back of our little church, honoring my Tommy with their presence. Your Royal Highnesses, you gave my grandson something precious in his final days. You made him feel important, valued, seen. For that I will be grateful until my dying day." The elderly woman's composure finally broke and she began to weep openly. Her son quickly moved to support her, helping her back to her seat as the congregation sat in stunned silence. Catherine found herself overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. The gratitude in Mrs. Henderson's voice was almost too much to bear, making her acutely aware of how little they had actually done compared to what this family had endured. At the same time, she felt a deep sense of rightness about their decision to come, a confirmation that sometimes the most important acts of service were the simplest ones. The vicar concluded the service with a prayer for Tommy's soul and for comfort for those who mourned him. As the congregation began to file out of the church, William and Catherine remained in their seats, uncertain of the protocol for this unprecedented situation. "Should we approach the family?" Catherine whispered to William. "Let's wait and see what feels right," he replied. "We follow their lead." They watched as family members and friends approached Mrs. Henderson and her son, offering embraces and quiet words of condolence. The line moved slowly, each person taking time to share a memory or offer support. William and Catherine found themselves studying these interactions, seeing a kind of authentic human connection that was often absent from their formal royal engagements. Finally, as the church began to empty, Mrs. Henderson looked back toward where they sat. For a moment, their eyes met across the space, and something passed between them, an understanding, a shared recognition of loss and love in the strange ways that lives intersect. Slowly, Mrs. Henderson began walking toward them, supported by her son. Other family members followed, creating a small procession that moved with the weight of grief but also with purpose. "Your Royal Highnesses," Mrs. Henderson said when she reached their pew, her voice hoarse from crying. "I can't believe you came. I never imagined. When I wrote that letter, I never thought—" Catherine stood and moved toward the elderly woman, her royal training temporarily forgotten as her human instincts took over. "Mrs. Henderson, we're so sorry for your loss. Tommy was a remarkable boy." "He was," Mrs. Henderson agreed, fresh tears starting down her cheeks. "He was my everything." William joined them, and for a moment the small group stood together in the back of the church, connected by their shared memory of a brave little boy who had touched their lives in ways none of them had expected. "Thank you," Mrs. Henderson whispered. "Thank you for making his last weeks brighter. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for showing the world that Tommy mattered." Catherine felt her own tears beginning to fall as she realized the profound truth in the elderly woman's words. Tommy had mattered. His life, however brief, had had meaning and impact, and sometimes the greatest service they could provide was simply bearing witness to that truth. The small group moved slowly toward the church entrance where other mourners had gathered in the afternoon sunlight. Catherine noticed how the mood had shifted subtly. While grief still hung heavy in the air, there was something else now, a sense of wonder and disbelief that rippled through the crowd as word spread about the royal presence. Mrs. Henderson's son, who had introduced himself as David, walked beside William. "Your Highness, I have to ask, how did you know about the service?" "We didn't contact anyone outside the family in Tommy's school." William exchanged a glance with Catherine before answering. "Your mother wrote to us. She wanted us to know how much our hospital visit meant to Tommy. We felt we needed to be here." David's eyes widened with surprise and something that looked like profound gratitude. "Mom wrote to you?" "She never mentioned. She said she was going to, but I thought—" He trailed off, shaking his head in amazement. "Sometimes the most important letters are the ones that come from the heart," Catherine said gently. "Your mother's words touched us deeply." They reached the churchyard where the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the ancient gravestones. The burial service would be private, just for immediate family, but the extended community had gathered here to offer their final support. Catherine watched as Mrs. Henderson was approached by neighbor after neighbor, each person offering embraces and sharing brief memories of Tommy. She saw a picture emerging of a child who had been beloved not just by his family, but by an entire community. The postman spoke of how Tommy always waited by the gate to say hello. The woman from the corner shop remembered how he would carefully count out his pocket money to buy sweets for the other children in the cancer ward. "He sounds like he was an extraordinary little boy," Catherine said to David. "He was." David replied, his voice thick with emotion. "After his parents died, we all worried about how he would cope. But Tommy, he had this ability to find happiness even in difficult situations. When he got sick, he worried more about upsetting Mom than he did about his own pain." William found himself thinking about his own children again, imagining how George or Charlotte might handle such challenges. How did he stay so positive during his treatment? "The nurses said they'd never seen anything like it," David answered. "Tommy made friends with every child on the ward. He organized games for the kids who were strong enough to play. He even convinced the staff to let him help deliver meals sometimes. Said it made him feel useful." An elderly man approached their small group, his weathered hands clutching a flat cap. "Excuse me," he said hesitantly, "but I wanted to thank you for coming. I'm Tommy's headmaster, Mr. Williams. That boy brought such joy to our school." Catherine and William turned their attention to the educator, who seemed nervous but determined to speak. "Tommy missed a lot of school due to his treatments," Mr. Williams continued, "but whenever he was well enough to attend, he lit up the entire classroom. He never complained about feeling tired or sick. Instead, he would tell the other children about the hospital, making it sound like an adventure rather than something frightening." "That must have been incredibly moving to witness," William said. "It was, but what really struck me was how he talked about your visit. For weeks afterward, every assignment he turned in somehow mentioned meeting you both. His final project was about heroes. He wrote about doctors and nurses, about his grandmother, and about how even princes and princesses could be heroes by caring about regular people." Catherine felt her throat tighten with emotion. "Do you still have that project?" Mr. Williams nodded eagerly. "I brought it with me today thinking Mrs. Henderson might like to have it." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a few sheets of paper covered in a child's careful handwriting and colorful drawings. Catherine accepted the papers with trembling hands. The cover was decorated with crayoned castles and stick figures wearing crowns. Inside, Tommy had written about different kinds of heroes, illustrating each section with drawings that showed his imagination and hope despite his circumstances. The section about William and Catherine was titled Real, Princes and Princesses Who Care About Kids. Tommy had drawn them visiting the hospital, with himself smiling in a hospital bed surrounded by other children. His description was simple but profound. "Prince William and Princess Kate came to see us in the hospital. They didn't have to come, but they did because they care about people. Princess Kate has the nicest smile, and Prince William told me I was brave. They made me feel special. Real heroes make other people feel important. William read over Catherine's shoulder, both of them deeply moved by the child's words. The drawing showed remarkable detail for someone so young and sick. He had even remembered the pattern on Catherine's dress and the way William had knelt down to speak with him at eye level. "This is beautiful," Catherine whispered, looking up at Mr. Williams with tears in her eyes. "May we? Would it be possible to make a copy? I'd like to share this with our own children." "Of course," the headmaster replied immediately. "I think Tommy would be delighted to know that his words reached your family." As they stood there in the churchyard, reading Tommy's innocent but wise words about heroism and kindness, Catherine became aware of the crowd that had gathered around them. Word of their presence had spread beyond the funeral attendees, and local residents were beginning to arrive, drawn by curiosity and the rare opportunity to see the royal couple in their own community. But these weren't the usual crowds they encountered during official visits. There were no barriers, no security protocols, no carefully managed photo opportunities. Instead, people approached with genuine warmth and gratitude, many of them sharing their own memories of Tommy or expressing amazement that the royal couple had come to honor a local child. "Your Highnesses," an elderly woman said, approaching with obvious nervousness, "I live next door to Mrs. Henderson. I just wanted to say how much this means to our community. Tommy was such a special boy, and seeing you here, it feels like the whole world is acknowledging what we've always known, that every child matters, regardless of who they are or where they come from." Her words struck at the heart of something William and Catherine had been grappling with throughout their royal duties: the balance between their privileged position and their desire to serve meaningfully. Here, in this small churchyard surrounded by people whose lives were far removed from palace walls and state ceremonies, they felt a connection to their purpose that was often obscured by protocol and formality. "Tommy mattered very much to us," Catherine replied sincerely. "Meeting him reminded us why we do what we do." As the afternoon progressed and the burial service concluded, the royal couple found themselves reluctant to leave. This wasn't just about paying respects anymore. It had become something deeper, a reminder of the real impact their positions could have when they set aside convention and followed their hearts. Mrs. Henderson approached them one final time before they departed, her eyes red with tears but her expression filled with a peace that hadn't been there earlier. "I don't know how to thank you," she said simply. "Tommy would be so proud to know you came. He always said that meeting you made him feel like anything was possible, even when he was scared." Catherine reached out and took the elderly woman's hands in her own. "Mrs. Henderson, Tommy gave us far more than we gave him. His courage, his kindness, his joy in the face of such challenges, that's something we'll never forget. He's taught our children about bravery without ever meeting them. The moment that followed would be remembered by everyone present." In full view of the gathered crowd with no photographers or official documentation, Catherine embraced Mrs. Henderson with genuine warmth and sorrow. William joined them, creating a circle of shared grief and gratitude that transcended royal protocol entirely. It was a moment of pure human connection, unplanned and authentic, that would indeed move the world to tears when word of it spread in the days to come. The drive back to London was quiet for the first 20 minutes. Both William and Catherine were lost in their own thoughts, processing the profound experience they had just shared. The countryside rolled past their windows again, but now it looked different somehow, more connected to their lives, more real than the usual carefully orchestrated journeys between official engagements. "We're going to face questions," William finally said, breaking the silence. "By tomorrow morning, word will have spread. The palace will want explanations." Catherine nodded, still clutching Tommy's school project in her hands. "I know, but William, I don't regret it for a moment. Did you see Mrs. Henderson's face when we embraced her? Did you hear what David said about Tommy talking about us until his final day?" "I saw," William replied softly. "I heard every word. And you're right, I don't regret it either. But we need to be prepared for the reaction." As if summoned by their conversation, William's phone began ringing. The caller ID showed his private secretary's number. William glanced at Catherine, then answered. "Sir," came the crisp voice of his aide, "I've been receiving calls for the past hour from various media outlets. Apparently there are reports of you and the princess attending a private funeral in Hampshire. The palace press office is requesting immediate clarification." William sighed. "It's true. We attended the funeral of a child we met during a hospital visit. a 7-year-old boy named Tommy Henderson. The pause on the other end of the line stretched long enough that William wondered if the connection had been lost. "Sir?" the secretary finally said, his voice carefully controlled. "This is unprecedented. A private funeral with no security detail, no advance notice to the local authorities. Sir, there are protocols in place for a reason." "I understand that," William replied firmly. "But sometimes there are things more important than protocol." After ending the call, Catherine reached over and took William's hand. "Are you having doubts now?" "No," he said immediately. "But I am thinking about what comes next. This won't just be a story about us attending a funeral. It's going to become a larger conversation about the role of the monarchy, about accessibility, about whether we're setting precedents that can't be sustained." Catherine looked out the window at the passing villages, thinking about all the families like Tommy's who lived quiet lives far from the spotlight. Maybe that conversation needs to happen. Maybe it's time to question some of these protocols. They were approaching the outskirts of London when Catherine's phone rang. The caller was her own private secretary, and the conversation followed a similar pattern. Concern about security, questions about precedent, requests for official statements to explain their actions. By the time they reached Kensington Palace, the sun was setting and the first news reports were already appearing online. Catherine's phone buzzed with notifications as social media began picking up the story. The headlines were varied in tone. "Royal couple breaks protocol to honor dying child," "William and Kate's unprecedented gesture," "A funeral that broke royal rules." "Look at this," Catherine said, scrolling through her phone. She showed William a post from someone who had been at the funeral. It was a simple message that read, "Today I watched the future King and Queen of England cry real tears for a 7-year-old boy they barely knew." There was nothing royal about it and everything human about it. Tommy Henderson would have been so proud. The post had already been shared hundreds of times, with comments pouring in from people around the world. Many shared their own stories of loss, of children who had fought brave battles against illness, of the comfort that comes from knowing someone cares. "This is what I was afraid of," William said, reading over her shoulder. "It's becoming bigger than Tommy, bigger than Mrs. Henderson. It's becoming a symbol." "Is that necessarily bad?" Catherine asked. "If Tommy's story inspires other people, if it reminds people that every child matters, if it shows that royalty can be about service rather than just ceremony, maybe that's exactly what should happen." That evening, as they sat in their private apartment with their own children, the weight of the day's events continued to settle around them. George, Charlotte, and Louis were full of questions about where their parents had been, why they seemed sad, why there were more phone calls than usual. Catherine found herself telling them about Tommy Henderson, not the details of his illness or death, but the story of a brave little boy who had faced challenges with courage and kindness. She showed them his school project, reading aloud his words about heroes and what it meant to care about other people. "Was he scared?" Charlotte asked, her 8-year-old mind trying to process the concept of a child facing such difficulties. "I think he was sometimes," Catherine answered honestly, "but being scared didn't stop him from being kind to other people. Being scared didn't stop him from trying to help other children who were sick too." George, who at 10 was beginning to understand more about his future role, asked the question that went to the heart of everything. Did we do the right thing by going to his funeral? William looked at his eldest son, seeing glimpses of the king he would one day become. "George, sometimes being royal means following rules and traditions. But sometimes it means knowing when to put those things aside to do what's right. Today we chose to honor a brave little boy and comfort his family. I believe that was the right thing to do, even if people say we shouldn't have." George pressed even then, William confirmed. Sometimes the most important thing a leader can do is show that they're human. Later that night, after the children were in bed, William and Catherine received a call from King Charles. Catherine felt her stomach tighten, expecting criticism or at least concern about their breach of protocol. "I've been hearing quite a lot about your day," the king's voice came through the phone speaker. "The palace is in something of an uproar, as I'm sure you can imagine." "Father, we can explain," William began. "No need for explanations," Charles interrupted gently. "I've read the reports, spoken to several people who were there. I wanted to call to tell you both how proud I am." The silence that followed was filled with surprise and relief. "You are?" Catherine asked. "My dear Catherine, I've spent my entire life trying to make the monarchy more relevant, more connected to the people we serve. What you both did today, choosing compassion over protocol, humanity over hierarchy, that's exactly what the monarchy needs for the future. Charles continued, his voice warm with approval. There will be critics, certainly. There will be those who say you've set a dangerous precedent, that you can't possibly attend every funeral or respond to every personal request. But sometimes precedents need to be set. Sometimes the monarchy needs to be reminded that our first duty is to the people, not to the institution. William felt a weight lift from his shoulders that he hadn't even realized he was carrying. Thank you, Father. That means everything. The boy's grandmother has requested to speak with you tomorrow, Charles added. Apparently, she has something else she wants to share. I've taken the liberty of arranging for her to visit the palace. If you're agreeable. Catherine and William exchanged glances, both immediately nodding their agreement. Of course, Catherine said. We'd be honored to meet with her again. As they ended the call, Catherine felt a sense of rightness about the day's events that went beyond the relief of royal approval. They had followed their hearts, honored a child's memory, and comforted a grieving family. In the process, they had perhaps reminded themselves and others what true royal service could look like. Tomorrow is going to be interesting, William said, pulling Catherine close to him. Tomorrow is going to be exactly what it needs to be, Catherine replied, thinking of Mrs. Henderson and whatever message she felt compelled to share. Outside their windows, London hummed with its usual energy, unaware that a small funeral in Hampshire had planted seeds of change that would grow far beyond anything anyone could imagine. Mrs. Henderson arrived at Kensington Palace the next morning, accompanied by her son David and carrying a small wooden box that she clutched protectively in her weathered hands. Catherine and William met them in one of the smaller, more intimate reception rooms rather than the formal state apartments, a choice that reflected the personal nature of this meeting. The elderly woman looked overwhelmed by the grandeur around her, but her determination was evident in the way she held herself upright, despite her obvious exhaustion from the previous day's events. Mrs. Henderson, Catherine said warmly, approaching her with genuine pleasure. Thank you so much for coming. How are you feeling today? Still a bit like I'm dreaming, to be honest, the grandmother replied with a small smile that didn't quite reach her red-rimmed eyes. Yesterday was, well, it was more than I ever could have imagined. Tommy would have been beside himself with excitement, knowing that you came to his service. They settled into comfortable chairs arranged around a low table, where tea had been prepared. Mrs. Henderson placed the wooden box carefully beside her, her hands never straying far from it. You mentioned that you had something you wanted to share with us, William said gently. Please, take your time. Mrs. Henderson nodded, taking a deep breath as if gathering courage. After you left yesterday, I went through Tommy's room. I've been putting it off, you understand. It felt too final somehow. But seeing you there, seeing how much his life mattered to you, it gave me the strength to face his things. She paused, wiping her eyes with a handkerchief. Tommy was always making things, drawings, little crafts, stories. He said he was going to be an artist when he grew up, or maybe a writer. The doctors and treatments never dimmed that creative spirit of his. David reached over and squeezed his mother's hand encouragingly. In his room, hidden under his mattress like some kind of treasure, I found this, Mrs. Henderson continued, placing her hand on the wooden box. It's something he was working on in secret, apparently. According to the note he left with it, he'd been planning to send it to you both, but... Her voice broke slightly, but he ran out of time. Catherine felt her heart clench with emotion. Mrs. Henderson, you don't have to share this if it's too difficult. No, dear, the elderly woman said firmly. I need to. Tommy wanted you to have this, and I promised him that any promises he made would be kept. With careful hands, she opened the wooden box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper that had clearly been chosen with care, was a hand-painted picture frame. The frame itself was decorated with tiny painted flowers, castles, and what appeared to be footballs. Inside the frame was a drawing that took Catherine's breath away. The picture showed Tommy in his hospital bed, but he wasn't alone. Standing beside the bed were William and Catherine, instantly recognizable despite being rendered in a child's artistic style. But what made the drawing extraordinary was the additional figures Tommy had included. Other children in hospital beds, nurses, doctors, his grandmother, even what appeared to be his deceased parents watching from above with angel wings. At the bottom of the drawing, in Tommy's careful printing, were the words, "My heroes, everyone who helps people feel less scared." But it was the note tucked behind the drawing that brought tears to everyone's eyes. Written in Tommy's distinctive handwriting, it read, "Dear Prince William and Princess Kate, thank you for visiting me and making me feel special. I made this picture to show you that there are heroes everywhere, not just in stories. You are heroes because you care about kids like me. My grandma is a hero because she takes care of me even when she's sad about mom and dad. The doctors and nurses are heroes because they help sick children every day. I wanted to give this to you so you remember that being a hero isn't about having a crown or living in a palace. It's about making other people feel less alone. I hope your children know how lucky they are to have hero parents. Love, Tommy Henderson, P.S. I hope I get to meet you again someday, maybe when I'm all better. But if I don't, please remember me and all the kids like me who just want someone to care." The room fell completely silent except for the quiet sound of crying. Catherine reached for the frame with trembling hands, studying every detail of Tommy's artwork. The love and hope that had gone into creating this gift was evident in every carefully painted flower, every thoughtfully placed figure. "He worked on this for weeks," David said quietly. "He kept asking Mum for new paints, new brushes. He was so secretive about it, but so excited. He kept saying he was making something important for his royal friends." William leaned forward, his voice thick with emotion. "Mrs. Henderson, this is—" "I don't have words. The generosity of spirit it took for Tommy to create this while he was fighting for his life. That was Tommy," Mrs. Henderson said with pride breaking through her grief. "Even when he was at his sickest, he was thinking about other people. The nurses used to joke that he worried more about everyone else's feelings than his own." Catherine looked up from the drawing, her eyes bright with tears. "Mrs. Henderson, would you mind if we shared this? Not the note, that's private for us. But the drawing itself, I think people need to see Tommy's definition of heroism. I think the world needs to understand what true courage looks like." The elderly woman's face lit up with the first genuine smile they had seen from her. "Tommy would love that. He always said his art was meant to make people happy, to help them see the good things even when times were hard." "There's something else," David added, reaching into his jacket. "The headmaster mentioned that several other families from the children's ward have been in touch since yesterday. Word of your attendance at Tommy's funeral has spread throughout the hospital community. They wanted to express their gratitude, and many of them have shared stories similar to Tommy's. Children who were inspired by your visit, who drew strength from knowing that people in your position cared about them." He handed Catherine a collection of letters and drawings from other families. Each one told a similar story. A sick child who had been touched by the royal visit, who had found courage in the knowledge that they mattered to people they had only met briefly. "This is what I wanted you to understand," Mrs. Henderson said earnestly. "Tommy wasn't unique in how much your visit meant to him. There are dozens of children, maybe hundreds, who carry memories of your kindness. What you did yesterday honoring Tommy's life, it sends a message to all of them that their lives matter too." Catherine felt overwhelmed by the responsibility and the opportunity that Mrs. Henderson was presenting. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything specific," the elderly woman replied. "I'm just asking you to remember that there are Tommy Hendersons in every hospital, every school, every community. Children who are fighting battles that would break most adults, who just need to know that someone sees them, someone values them." William found himself thinking about the precedent they had set, the doors they had opened. "Mrs. Henderson, we can't attend every funeral, visit every sick child. The logistics alone would be impossible." "I'm not asking you to," she said gently. "I'm asking you to remember that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply show up. Not as royals, not as symbols, but as human beings who care." As their meeting drew to a close, Mrs. Henderson made one final request. "Would it be possible? Would your children be able to see Tommy's drawing?" He wrote in his diary that he hoped royal children would understand that they could be heroes too, not because of their titles, but because of their choices. "Of course," Catherine said immediately. "In fact, would you like to meet them? They've been asking about Tommy since yesterday, and I think they would love to hear about him from someone who knew him well." The introduction of George, Charlotte, and Louis to Mrs. Henderson created a moment of unexpected magic. The children, initially shy in the presence of this grieving stranger, quickly warmed to her gentle manner and obvious love for Tommy. She showed them the drawing, explaining each figure and sharing stories that made Tommy come alive for them. "He sounds like he was really brave," Charlotte said solemnly. "He was," Mrs. Henderson agreed. "But you know what made him special? He was scared sometimes, just like everyone else. Being brave doesn't mean you're not scared. It means you do good things even when you are scared." George, with a seriousness that sometimes surprised adults, asked, "Mrs. Henderson, how can we be heroes like Tommy was?" The elderly woman smiled, reaching out to touch the boy's hand. "By remembering that everyone you meet is fighting some kind of battle, even if you can't see it. By being kind even when it's not required. By using whatever gifts you have, whether it's a title or artistic talent, or just a caring heart, to make other people feel less alone." As Mrs. Henderson prepared to leave, she pressed a small envelope into Catherine's hands. "This is the last letter Tommy wrote the night before he died. He asked me to give it to you if anything happened to him. I think today is the right time." That evening, after Mrs. Henderson and David had returned to Hampshire, Catherine and William sat alone in their sitting room. Catherine held Tommy's final letter unopened, almost afraid of what additional emotions it might unleash. "Are you ready?" William asked gently. Catherine nodded and carefully opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a brief message in Tommy's now familiar handwriting. "Dear Prince William and Princess Kate, if you are reading this, it means I didn't get to grow up and become a footballer or an artist. But that's okay because I got to meet you, and that was better than anything I could have dreamed. Please don't be sad for me. I had a really good life even though it was short. I had the best grandma in the world, and I got to be friends with lots of other brave kids, and I met real royalty who cared about me. Please remember all the kids like me. We don't need much. Just someone to notice us and think we're important too. Tell your children that Tommy Henderson thought they were lucky to have parents who are real heroes. Your friend forever, Tommy." As Catherine finished reading, she and William looked at each other with the same thought. Tommy Henderson's legacy wasn't going to end with his funeral. His courage, his wisdom, his generous spirit had planted something that would continue to grow, changing not just their approach to their royal duties, but potentially touching countless other lives in ways they were only beginning to understand. 6 months after Tommy Henderson's funeral, Catherine stood in the newly established Tommy Henderson Children's Courage Center at the hospital, where they had first met the remarkable little boy. The walls were decorated with artwork from children throughout the ward, colorful drawings that spoke of hope, dreams, and the unshakable spirit of young people facing impossible challenges. William joined her in front of a special display case that held Tommy's original drawing of heroes alongside dozens of others, created by children inspired by his story. The center had become more than anyone had imagined when Mrs. Henderson first suggested that Tommy's artwork be shared with the world. The nurses tell me that children ask to see Tommy's picture almost every day, Catherine said, watching a young patient carefully study the drawing. They say it helps them understand that being in the hospital doesn't make them any less important. The idea for the center had emerged gradually in the weeks following their meeting with Mrs. Henderson. The overwhelming response to Tommy's story, letters from families around the world, artwork from other sick children, messages from healthcare workers who had witnessed similar acts of courage, had made it clear that Tommy's message needed a permanent home. But more than that, it had sparked a broader conversation about the role of compassion in healing, about the importance of recognizing the heroism that existed in hospital wards every day. The Tommy Henderson Center wasn't just a memorial. It was a living testament to the power of seeing and valuing every child's struggle. "Your Royal Highnesses," came a familiar voice behind them. They turned to see Mrs. Henderson approaching, moving more easily than she had 6 months ago. The crushing weight of fresh grief had gradually transformed into something else. Not happiness exactly, but a sense of purpose that had given her a reason to continue. She had become the center's first volunteer coordinator, sharing Tommy's story with newly admitted children and their families, helping them understand that they were part of a community of courage that extended far beyond the hospital walls. "Mrs. Henderson," Catherine said warmly, embracing the elderly woman who had become far more than just a chance acquaintance. "How are the new families settling in?" "Oh, they're remarkable," she replied, her eyes bright with the kind of energy that comes from meaningful work. "There's a little girl, Sarah, who's just started treatment. She was terrified until I showed her Tommy's drawing and told her about all the heroes who work in this hospital. Now she's made friends with 3 other children and appointed herself the unofficial welcome committee for new patients." William smiled, remembering similar stories from their recent visits to the center. "It's exactly what Tommy would have wanted, isn't it? Children helping other children?" "It is," Mrs. Henderson agreed. "But you know what I think would make him even happier? Seeing how his story has changed things beyond just this hospital." She was referring to the ripple effect that had spread far beyond their original intentions. The story of Tommy's courage and the royal couple's decision to honor him had inspired similar initiatives at children's hospitals across the country. More significantly, it had sparked a broader discussion about the monarchy's role in addressing the everyday struggles of ordinary families. The palace had initially been concerned about the precedent of attending private funerals, but the overwhelmingly positive response had demonstrated something important about public sentiment. People weren't looking for their royals to be distant symbols. They wanted to see genuine human connection, authentic compassion, real engagement with the challenges facing their communities. "Dr. Morrison wanted to speak with you both when you arrived," Mrs. Henderson mentioned, referring to the hospital's chief pediatric oncologist. "She has some updates about the research funding that's come in since the center opened." They found Dr. Morrison in her office, surrounded by grant applications and research proposals. The physician looked up as they entered, her face showing the kind of cautious optimism that healthcare workers develop when dealing with both tragedy and hope on a daily basis. "Your Highnesses." "Mrs. Henderson," she greeted them warmly. "I wanted to share some remarkable news. The attention that Tommy's story brought to pediatric cancer research has resulted in funding commitments that exceed anything we had hoped for." She gestured to the papers covering her desk. 3 major pharmaceutical companies have pledged significant research support. The university has approved a new pediatric psychology program, focused specifically on helping children cope with serious illness. And perhaps most importantly, we've received commitments from 12 other hospitals to establish their own versions of Tommy's center. Catherine felt a surge of emotion that had become familiar over the past months. The bittersweet recognition that tremendous good could emerge from devastating loss. Tommy would be amazed to know that his courage is helping so many other children. "But that's not all," Dr. Morrison continued. "The most significant development is something that Tommy himself inspired. Do you remember his note about heroes being everywhere? Well, the children in our ward have taken that idea and run with it." She led them to a bulletin board covered with photographs and short essays. The children have created their own Heroes Among Us project. They interview and recognize the people who make their treatment possible, not just doctors and nurses, but the cleaning staff who keep them safe from infection, the food service workers who make sure they have nutrition, the volunteers who read stories, even the maintenance workers who keep the medical equipment functioning. William studied the display, seeing picture after picture of hospital staff members posing proudly with young patients. Each photo was accompanied by a brief essay written by a child, explaining why that particular person was a hero in their eyes. "It's changed the entire culture of the hospital," Dr. Morrison explained. "Staff members who previously felt invisible or undervalued are now recognized as essential parts of the healing team. The children have taught all of us something about the true meaning of heroism." Mrs. Henderson smiled as she watched William and Catherine reading the children's essays. This is what Tommy understood even at 7 years old. Heroism isn't about grand gestures or special powers. It's about showing up, caring about others, and doing your part to make the world a little bit better. As they prepared to leave the hospital that day, Catherine and William were approached by a young boy who couldn't have been more than 6 years old. He was clearly a patient, evidenced by his hospital bracelet and the careful way he moved, but his eyes sparkled with the kind of determination they had learned to recognize in children facing serious challenges. "Are you the prince and princess who came to Tommy's funeral?" the boy asked directly, with the refreshing honesty that only children possess. "We are," Catherine replied gently, kneeling down to his eye level. "What's your name?" "I'm Marcus," he said proudly. "I'm getting medicine to make me better just like Tommy did. Mrs. Henderson told me about him and I wanted to say thank you." "Thank you for what, Marcus?" William asked, also crouching down to join the conversation. "For showing up," Marcus said simply, unknowingly echoing the phrase that had become central to their evolving understanding of their role. Mrs. Henderson says that sometimes the most important thing you can do for someone is just show up and let them know they matter. Catherine felt tears welling in her eyes as she realized that Tommy's wisdom was continuing to spread, passed from child to child, creating a legacy of compassion that would extend far beyond anything they could have planned or orchestrated. "Marcus, you're absolutely right," she said. "And do you know what? You matter very much to us," the little boy beamed with pride. "I know, Tommy told us that in his letter. He said that even when people are important and busy, they can still care about kids like us. He said that's what makes them real heroes." As they drove back to London that evening, Catherine and William reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple decision to attend a child's funeral. What had started as an act of compassion had evolved into something much larger, a reminder that their roles could be about more than ceremony and tradition. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we hadn't read Mrs. Henderson's letter that morning?" Catherine asked. "I try not to," William replied, "but I'm grateful every day that we did. Tommy changed us, didn't he? Changed how we think about what it means to serve." Catherine nodded, thinking about the children they had met over the past months, the families they had comforted, the hospital staff who had been inspired to see their work as heroic rather than simply necessary. "He taught us that the most powerful thing we can do is see people, really see them, value them, acknowledge that their lives and struggles matter," she said. "That lesson is worth more than any protocol we might have broken." As they reached Kensington Palace, they could see their own children playing in the garden, their laughter carrying across the evening air. George, Charlotte, and Louis had been profoundly affected by Tommy's story, developing an understanding of service and compassion that went far beyond their years.